All right. So there's an old adage that says if you're the smartest person in the room, you're in the wrong room. And when I started to build my team, well, I didn't share this, so I lead organization development at Microsoft. And when I started to build my team, I really took that into account as I was bringing people onto the newly established team, which has 3 practice areas. One is focused on org design and operating models. Another one is focused on teaming for high performance. And the last one is focused on large scale change and transformation. Ewa represents this for me. Ewa Kacewicz, I can honestly say, makes me a better leader and makes me a better person because of the presence that she brings to the team. Ewa leads our org design and operating model practice, and she brings a unique blend of experiences, both as consulting experience from Bain's operating model practice, but then she also has in-house tech OD experience at Oracle and Dell. And then she also has a PhD in social and organizational psychology. So we like to think of ourselves as practitioner scholars. What I really love about Ewa's gift is that she's able to take complex, data-driven approaches to synthesizing complexity and developing really practical, human-centered interventions. At Microsoft, she's been leading the design of an AI-powered operating model in partnership with Amy Cates and helping us rethink how strategies get operationalized in our world. Ewa's brilliant, thoughtful, and incredible partnership has been key to our transformation journey, both in HR and across the company. So please join me in welcoming Ewa for the keynote focused on accelerating Microsoft's AI transformation and org design and development approach to systems.
Thank you, Omar. That was very kind. And Omar is an amazing boss. I'm really grateful to work under and with him. So I'm going to introduce Amy. Amy and I met around 10 years ago, and Amy is an amazing practitioner. She worked with Jay Galbraith, and she basically took theoretical models and translated them into practical, practical tools, methodologies. She has like 6 or 7 books that she's written, one with Jay Galbraith, or 2, I think, with Jay Galbraith. But what's amazing is that despite all the successes, when I met her, I reached out. It was like a cold call. I was just really inspired. I had read her books, and I really wanted to learn more from her. And she reached back out. She set up a meeting, and she's been mentoring me all along. So again, she takes time to invest in people. She's always willing to share her frameworks and her knowledge. So yes, she is amazing, and I will pass it on to her.
Okay, thank you, Ewa, and thank you, Omar. It's great to be here, and yes, I've known Ewa for 10 years, and she's really one of the bright lights of the next generation of org designers, and really exciting to share the work that we've been doing together at Microsoft. I'm not with Microsoft, I'm an independent consultant and org designer, but have been able to work with the team there as they've done this. So what I'm going to do is sort of set things up, frame it, and then Ewa's going to take you through a lot of the work that they've actually done. So the first thing is I am an organization designer, so I want to start with a few definitions and how I see the relationship of organization design to organization development, and then that will be relevant to how this work played out. So generally, our goal, all of us together as practitioners, is org effectiveness, right? Making healthy organizations. So in my mind, it starts with strategy clarification, and I think all of us do some of that in our work, helping our clients understand where are they trying to get to, what is the gap. And then we have organization design, and I think of org design as really making visible the intention of the organization, an organization that can deliver on the strategy, right? As Ewa said, I've devoted my life, my career of 30 years to really bringing Jay Galbraith's brilliant thinking about how do you shape human behavior in groups into practical tools and frameworks through our writing and our consulting work. But org design is only an intention, right? It's a hope of what we want the organization to do. It doesn't come to life without organization development, which activates the design through all of the work that many of you do, whether it's with teams, with leaders, building cultures, creating capabilities. And so I don't think as one as an umbrella to the other, but I think about first having understanding strategy, creating an intention, and then bringing it to life. And of course, conversely, if we only use our org development tools without a clarity of what we're trying to build, then, it's that old saying that, if you don't know where you're going, any path will take you there. The tools have to be in service of an effective organization. So with that in mind, let's talk about our topic today. So the title is how to accelerate AI adoption, and AI is the big theme. And we're not going to talk a lot about AI as how it's changing the world of work and how it's the biggest thing ever. We're looking at it through the lens of this is yet another thing that organizations are going through. It's a change. And all of us, our work is to help leaders and leadership teams and the good people in organizations figure out, how do I make this change? Personally, at the team level, and at the organization level. So our lens here is that, okay, AI adoption, whatever that looks like for an organization, is really just another classic org effectiveness challenge. So let me set the context here a bit with Microsoft. So as you know, Microsoft, fabulous company, produces many of the cutting edge AI tools that many of us use every day. Right? And Microsoft customers, consumers as well as their big B2B customers, expect Microsoft to be customer zero, right? You should be the model of how you use all of these tools to run your business and create effective organizations. But the reality is Microsoft is a big, complex system made of many parts. Some of those are moving fast, and some of them are moving slower. And it is a challenge of how do you coordinate a change? Now, the challenge here is the challenge, again, that we face in many kinds of large-scale change. Number one, how do we help leaders move their organizations from point A to point B? And that's hard enough when we know what point B is, but with AI, we don't even know really what the goal is in many cases, right? So we're moving toward a moving target. Number two is, how do we create an environment of fast and local experimentation while providing enterprise guidance, right? So this is a classic polarity in organizations of we want to be fast, we want to be edge, we want to be local, we want experimentation, and yet particularly with something like this that has risks, that has ethical implications, that have implications on work lives and business performance, it has to be coordinated from the center. But we also know in big complex organizations, if you try to do everything top down, not a whole lot happens. And the third thing is then how do we accelerate learning within and between groups? And I think this is at the very heart of all of our practices of helping the systems that we're working with learn from the good things that they're doing. So within teams, but also between units. And this is what we're going to share with you today, is how Microsoft went about, and is in the process, this is not done, very much live and in the process of creating an enterprise-led, very human-centered, business-focused learning environment around AI adoption. So we talk about three big ideas for today. Number one is we can accelerate AI adoption or any sort of large-scale complex change by doing three things. Giving leaders a framework to make the system visible, helping them name and see the dynamic that's going on in their company. Then number two, classic for all of us, is identifying the gap. So-called maturity model. Where are we trying to get to? Diagnosing the gaps. Again, giving them a language to talk about that, and then create an action plan. And number three is designing enablers in the system that speed learning cycles between and within groups and internal transfer of great practices. And we'll talk particularly about what's happening in the HR organization at Microsoft, some very cool and innovative things to help that along. Okay, So I'm just going to set this up before I hand it over to Ewa to take you through actually the work. But this first idea, and this is very core to the work that I do as an organization designer, is making systems visible. So another definition, we often use the term operating model. Really what an operating model is a vision of how we want the organization to work. How do the pieces go together to run a business, to run an organization? And I'll just set up what those are. So this is a basic framework that could be used for any sort of topic, right? We're going to talk about AI today, but any kind of work that you do. So first, strategy, direction. Then number two is what are the management processes that we need? And we think about managed processes as resource allocation, right? Where do we put investments? Where do we put people? In this case, sometimes now, agents, AI agents, decisions and governance. It's the heart of our work. How do we speed good, fast decision-making across boundaries? And then how do we measure success? What is business performance? Then ways of working, a whole set of agile, lean, what is the process? How does work get done? High performance teams, right? How do we think about team as the basic unit of the organization? And, you know, the world changes, but in my 30 years of doing this work, human beings haven't evolved at all. We still like to work in teams and know who are our team, and that continuous kind of effort of creating high performance teams and identifying where do we draw those boundaries is core to all our work. And then finally, skilling, right? What are the skills? And then the last piece is this idea of ongoing assessment of organizational health. And if we think about, these are the pieces that any leader of an organization is constantly pulling levers, adjusting the dials. What is the strategy? How do we manage decisions and resources? And then how do we create the kind of ways of work that create the right competencies and skills and the right collaboration and the right handoffs in the organization? And then how do we know how we're doing? Okay, simple. So now let me turn it over to Ewa, and she's going to take you through then starting with this model, how they brought this to life and the impacts that they're having at Microsoft.
Awesome, thank you, Amy. So great news, we'll share these templates with you because again, this is something that you can take and repurpose for your own clients or organizations. But let me highlight what it looked like for us at Microsoft. So I've used this with various client groups within the organization. As Amy mentioned, it's very complex, very federated. So, you know, groups work pretty independently. But the way we thought about it is the strategy is really embedding AI deeply into the mission and purpose. And if you look at AI native companies, like their mission and purpose is deeply embedded in everything they do. So like Anthropic, as an example, is very focused on safety. So in hiring, they focus on safety. In onboarding, everything they do. So that would be strategy. When you shift to management processes, from a resource allocation perspective, AI helps. Oh, one thing I want to mention is this is truly an aspirational state. We're not there yet, but eventually I envision that we'll get here. But dynamic resource allocation, basically considering, you know, what are those resources and where do they need to be deployed on a continuous basis, whether it's assets, you know, human resources, financial, tech resources. And then decisions and governance. One key element that we see in AI, and actually a lot of customer-centered organizations, is pushing decisions down to the people on the front line so they can make decisions in service of the customer, in service of, you know, whoever they're working with extremely quickly and empowering them. You know, it's always the worst when you have top leaders who don't really know what's going on making decisions for you. So the goal is to democratize data and information so that the people on the front lines can actually make the decisions. The other key piece is having a very structured governance. So we'll dive a little bit more into the case study and why it's so beneficial, but a governance that really orchestrates from top to bottom. Because one thing that we're seeing with AI is that there's a lot of great grassroots initiatives. Like at Microsoft, a lot of different people are creating agents all over the place. Like I call them wildflowers. But there is no guidance from the top. So the key is to have that coordinated orchestration from top to bottom. And then business performance. AI really helps with that continual sensing, exploring leading, lagging indicators, and providing nudges to leaders to highlight, hey, like, we're behind, or this is trending in this direction, so you might want to do something about it. And then probably most importantly, the ways of working. So the people who are actually doing the work. So agile and lean processes are deeply embedded in everything people do, and they're empowered to basically make improvements, be continuous process engineers. We're shifting from a world where processes are standard and don't shift very often to one where people are continuously re-engineering in service of the customer and in service of speed. And then high performance teams, we're also shifting our ways of working. So I think structures will always be very important. As Amy likes to say, you need to put the right people in the right place at the right time so people can have the right conversations. But we're shifting to this more cross-functional, agile, deeply empowered teams where they own end-to-end outcomes and are, deeply empowered because they see the impact of what they're doing. And then finally, work and skills. So combining the hybrid ways of working with agents, with the humans, but also, automating, augmenting, amplifying tasks, removing, as Satya likes to say, the drudge tasks, the drudgery, so that humans can focus on the creative, the strategic, the things that we truly find meaningful and purposeful. And then finally, org health, the idea is that the AI would help identify early misalignment. So, from an operating model perspective, you want all these different levers to be aligned. If they're misaligned, I won't share any examples now, but if they're misaligned, you're not going to get the behavior that you want, and you're going to be surprised why you're not achieving outcomes. So AI predicts and can see the misalignments early on and provide those nudges. And the other key piece is, a lot of times there's broader ecosystems that we're working with. Like Microsoft has a slew of external partners that we're leveraging. So it can also assess, is this partner actually the right fit? Does it actually align with our mission and purpose? And then it can identify any misalignments there very early on. So again, this is Microsoft specific, but you can take this model and make it your own, depending on what's important to your organization. And so let's dive into a case study. Let's actually bring this to life. So I'm going to be focusing on data centers, and here's why. So the data center organization is probably more close to some of the organizations that you work with. It more closely resembles a manufacturing firm versus a technology firm, because people can say, oh yeah, of course it's easy for Microsoft or tech company, right, to drive AI transformation. But this organization is truly almost like a manufacturing, very focused on safety, reliability. So there are about 20,000 plus people in this organization, and they do everything from, planning to actually acquiring land, whether it's leasing or buying, to building out the data centers, to eventually running and then decommissioning them. So very complex organization. There's a lot of external partners and vendors that are involved, electricians, construction. So again, really different from the rest of Microsoft, and very focused on safety and reliability. So as a result, the planning cycles and product cycles are long. They take a long time. The product at the end of the, when it is launched, has to be perfect. There can be no irregularities because it can actually cause death, right? If there's an electrocution challenge. And then also it can have impact on the customers from, they're not getting the cloud services that they need. So a lot of implications, and this organization has to work with everyone from Azure to, ensure proper load balance, to internal partners like they have a procurement organization for the data centers, but then there's another procurement team that's focused on the inside of the data centers, so the servers. So again, a very complex organization. And so when I started working with them, what I saw initially was that there was no AI strategy. Like, of course, they had a big, bold step that was like, drive AI transformation, but it wasn't clear like what the actual trade-offs were, what were the guardrails, what were they actually supposed to be focusing on. So again, as I mentioned, there was a lot of these wildflower agents popping up, but then the question is like, is this actually a value add? And there was that recent study from MIT which showed that 95% of organizations aren't seeing the value of AI. And so my belief, my theory is that part of this is because we don't have this coordinated top-down and bottoms-up approach to help guide, what are we actually prioritizing? Is it actually enabling the outcomes that we're driving? The other key piece is we saw very fragmented language. So leaders, because they didn't have the shared language to talk about this broader system, they were all thinking about it in a really different way. So as a result, we also saw a slew of duplication. So as an example, people would be creating the same reports for the same customer. One would be AI, one would not be AI. And so again, duplication of resources. This team that was getting all these reports was very confused. They're like, which one do I leverage? And then the last challenge was they had an official process to identify and prioritize products for the next year. And out of the 200 products that they prioritized, guess how many were AI? Y'all are so close. Yeah, it was 0. So 0 products, AI products were prioritized. And when I dug in to understand like what's happening, who's making these decisions, like who's providing the input, it was the senior leadership team. So again, we unearthed some huge opportunities. So let's talk about how did we shift from insights to action. So what I'll mention is, as Amy said, a lot of the processes that we're already familiar with apply within the AI space. So we had a very simple process where we assessed where we were today, we leveraged the maturity diagnostic to understand the gap, and then we aligned on key actions and initiatives. And one thing I do want to mention is when we assessed where we were today, this group was actually doing a great job in some ways, like especially compared to some other organizations and units within Microsoft. Like they recognized that people were the center, that none of this was going to be accomplished without each and every individual, and that this required a huge culture shift. So they had change management components. They also had like an AI skilling day to bring people up to speed on all these different components. So they were doing a lot of great work already. But then when we calibrated against the maturity model, that's when we began to see some of the challenges and opportunities emerge that I just highlighted. So again, we calibrated against the maturity model, identified where they were. We'll dive into the maturity model momentarily, identified where they were and then where they wanted to go. And then based on that, we came up with a prioritized set of actions to really expedite, like increase that urgency so people wanted to act. What I'll say is in this process, the leaders were so excited because they were like, I have never seen all of this on one page. So just to have a framework and like a placemat where they could see all these different system components that were enabling or not enabling employees was huge. Like that was eye-opening for them. So let's take a closer look at the maturity model. So this isn't very small, but we'll send this out, so don't worry about trying to read it from here. So the goal of the maturity model, it wasn't to say, okay, everyone needs to be transformational. Every company is different, so it really depends on strategy. Like if you take a more manufacturing firm, they might want to stay in operational excellence. Like they want to be focused on safety, on quality, on cost. If you look at some other organizations in Microsoft, like Microsoft AI, like they want to be transformational, and they are like higher up on the rung of the totem poles as a result. So again, there is no good or bad score. It's really a conversation with the leadership team to understand where are you today and where would you want to go, and then identifying those key actions to get there. So I'll just give a snapshot of a few of them. So as an example, in operational excellence, teams are beginning to experiment with these collaborative, cross-functional teams. They're beginning to integrate AI into like targeted workflows, targeted processes to like reduce cost, increase speed. Whereas if you jump to the transformation, collaborative teams are the norm. That's the working model. Collaborative cross-functional teams. We have those continuous process engineers that are continually evaluating what are the new automation, augmentation opportunities. So again, just a snapshot of the differences that you might see. But it was a great diagnostic tool. And again, it was eye-opening because as another example, when I did this with the data center organization, they realized they didn't have many products that actually focused on innovation. All of them were focused on operational excellence and safety. Again, very important. So what did we do? Like, what were the key initiatives that emerged from leveraging this diagnostic model? So one was really focusing on decisions and governance. So they didn't have a governance in place. One thing that was eye-opening when we did this is the leaders said, you know, we had thought through the technical components. We had thought through the data governance. We had thought through like what kind of data we want to leverage, but they hadn't thought through the human components. So again, that's why this model is so beneficial, is that it helps bring to life the most important piece, which is the human. So there was no overarching governance. There was no overarching strategy to help with prioritization. So one of the things I loved that they did, and they were very eager, in fact, they actually created this slide, is that it had multiple variables. So starting with, you know, thinking through what are the layers of governance. You know, you have the executive team at the top, you have the cross-functional, like agile teams at the bottom. They also had the layer of time. So, you know, the team at the bottom is meeting monthly. At the top, yearly. You also had inputs and outputs to make it very clear who makes what decisions and who do I go to if there's like a resource blocker, as an example. And then they were very clear on who the audience were, who were the individuals that needed to be present at any given time. And what this enabled is an actual development of strategy, an actual development of prioritization criteria. So, you know, how do we decide what products we actually implement? And it also enabled prioritization of resources, because one challenge I forgot to mention is that in this organization, the 200 products that were, you know, focused on, there was only a subset of software engineers that could actually help implement the work, because we weren't leveraging software engineers from the rest of this 20,000 person organization. So what this decisions and governance also enabled is, okay, we're prioritizing these projects and we have all these software engineers over here, let's pull on them. Let's pull them into these cross-functional teams so we can actually accomplish this versus relying just on this one team. So again, this was huge. And then the last thing I'll say here is that the leadership team were also astounded. I mean, this provided a whole bunch of visibility and transparency, which was not there before. So they were actually amazed by the work that was already happening that they didn't have visibility to. And they helped prioritize what came next and made the products actually have more outcome orientation. So the next key piece they focused on was the high performance teams. This was an interesting case because, again, as I mentioned, more manufacturing focused. And so initially they're like, well, Agile, that's not gonna work for us. Agile only works for like the software, the tech heavy. But they realized that in order to be successful, in order to share best practices, in order to reduce that duplication that I had mentioned, they needed to leverage these high performance teams. And they really needed to empower them. So the teams had end-to-end accountability on whatever they were driving. They were clear, so the business subject matter experts and the PMs, they dictated the scope and the focus and like the OKRs or like the outcomes that they were driving. And then the data scientists, people before software engineers actually executed the work, but they could see end to end what was happening. And as a result, I was talking to a software engineer, they're like, honestly, like I'm more excited to come to work now because I feel like I'm having more impact and more purpose. So, I mean, a whole bunch of benefits in terms of sharing best practices, reducing duplication, but also increasing speed. So as I mentioned, with these long lead times, longer planning cycles, that's really contradictory to AI because AI is quick, it's iterative, like nothing is perfect when it emerges. So this enables us, this way of working enabled us to start shifting towards a culture of iteration, experimentation, in a system where I had heard, well, we've just always done this way, right? How many times have we heard that? So very impactful. And then the last piece they focused on was the agile and lean process. So really thinking through, okay, we have the governance, we have the teams, but what is the process that we leverage in order to increase speed, like increase clarity so people understand who to go to what for when. And what I love about this is it's the simplicity of it, right? It's just a very simple process, discovery, prioritization, all the way to value delivery. They identified the key decisions in each of these steps that were the most important, key activities, what the outputs were, and then identified who actually owns these decisions. So it was clear like the business and the data center leadership were the ones who set the vision and the strategy and the priorities. And then prioritization, it was clear what prioritization mechanism was used and what the process was to surface a new idea so that people could submit ideas, like innovative, exciting ideas as needed. So again, this really helped to increase the speed. It really helped to clarify who to go to for what. I had a PM tell me, like, now I actually know who to go to if I have a roadblock. I'm like, you didn't know who to go to for that? But again, it just made the system visible, to Amy's point. So with that, Amy.
So watching this unfold and Eva's work over the last 6 months is, as you know, we sort of said, let's conceptualize what the operating model is. And then she went and found clients to work with, and seeing the excitement of the business to be able to understand their organization. Why am I getting the results that I am? And now what levers to produce? And I particularly love the idea that they produced those. She facilitated them to understand, and then they produced those outcomes, which you see if we think back to the STAR model, right, or around how do we create the right structures to create the right conversations? How do we create process and workflows, the right kind of metrics, focus people on, what new success looks like, and then really design decisions as well. So it's, don't have to be academic with them to help them start to diagnose and design a system that works for them. And it wasn't around benchmarking. It was what works for you. But this combination, strategy, where are we going? Even if we're not quite sure what the end goal is, but let's say what path we need to be on. Let's have a framework and then really bring all of our great tools that we know work. We don't have to reinvent them, bring all our classic tools to help, again, leaders make great decisions, and in this case, to realize AI value. Now, the last piece we're going to talk about, and then we'll get to some questions, is then how do you create a set of enablers inside to speed this? That idea of, great, they've done this, they have to get back to work, but who in an organization then is seeing this so that we can take that learning and move it around? And the HR organization is a really powerful mechanism for this when they are at their best, right? To weave all of the fabric of the organization together. So the next piece and the last piece that Eva will talk about is what's going on in the HR organization to increase organization learning.
Awesome. So let's talk about HR because we know that HR plays a critical role in helping to enable transformation, enable the leaders. And I just want to highlight this quote from Satya. So leaders need to create the right environment for AI to gain positive traction. It's going to require preparation and an intentional approach so these new AI tools not only help employees be more productive, but also help them to thrive. So leaders play a huge role in this process, and HR is behind the scenes, they're coaching. So really the goal is that HR models the behaviors they want the leadership team to exhibit, that they move with the speed that the business is moving, and they're familiar with the language, the AI language. They don't have to explain what an LLM is, which when I told my dad I was driving AI transformation, he's like, well, explain how you're building the LLM. I'm like, tata, which is dad in Polish. I'm like, I'm not building any LLM. So we don't need to get that complex, but just to have the basic terminology and language to be up to speed with the business. So what are the things that we did with the HRBP role? So we started experimenting, what could we do to help speed the learning, to help them enable the transformation while modeling the behaviors that we wanted the leaders to exhibit as well. So what we started with is really thinking through what their role was composed of. What were the tasks that their role was composed of? And then we deconstructed into several tasks, or more than several. And then we identified what were the automation, the augmentation, the amplification opportunities. Because as y'all know, HRBP spend a lot of time on a lot of different things, and sometimes it's hard to be strategic and really focus on transformation because they're doing some like repetitive and reactionary tasks that were requested by the leaders. And then finally, we validated with subject matter experts just to ensure that we were on track. So what emerged from this is we set up a strategy to help enable them. And Omar talked about the OD skilling on Sunday. One of the key components was dedicated investment. So traditional, 3 to 4 day training where they learned about everything from systems thinking to org design to change management and orchestration. And then when I started, one of my deliverables was a playbook. And as I'm building this playbook, which I'm like, we know what happens to playbooks, right? Like they get dusty, they sit on the shelf, you spend so much time working on them. So I was like, why can't we just develop an agent versus a playbook? So we did create a very simple playbook, but I ended up working with HR technology to develop an agentic solution called HR Pro Agent, which right now just has the OD capability. And then we also experimented with ways of working. So we shifted some organizations, again, experiment, everyone was doing it differently, but into these squad models. So instead of being aligned with a certain leader, at a certain level, it was basically a pool where the main leader would decide, what were the transformational priorities for this year, and then would pin HRBPs based on skill set into these different pods. And then obviously there was the hybrid human/agent component with the HR Pro Agent, where they could leverage, which I'll dive into that momentarily, where they could leverage it to learn, to gather resources, etc. And so what were the outcomes? So I found this really fascinating. One, this has enabled HR to move beyond transactional support and act as a strategic advisor who can diagnose root causes and co-create long-term solutions with business leaders. I mean, that is huge, because in removing those drudge tasks, right, it gave more time for these strategic initiatives. This signals a meaningful uplift in OD confidence and capability across HR, equipping line roles to show up with greater clarity, precision, and effectiveness in driving impact. Because one of the gaps was HRBP confidence. So again, really huge impact. Again, we're still experimenting, but so far it's been wildly successful. So let's learn a little bit more about the HR Pro Agent. So imagine if you had your own customized, I'm going to say Copilot because I work at Microsoft, although I know that a lot of you leverage other things like ChatGPT. But imagine if you had a personalized agent that basically had all the best OD resources. It had facilitation decks, agendas, subject matter expert knowledge. Well, that's what HR Pro Agent does. We basically fed all of our Microsoft models, theories, decks, facilitation decks, and then fine-tuned it. We're still fine-tuning it by getting subject matter experts to provide feedback. And what it enables is basically just-in-time information for the HRBP. So instead of like coming to the OD practitioners for like, hey, do you have a facilitation deck on XYZ? Or like, what process would you use to do XYZ? They can leverage the HR Pro Agent. And what I love about this is it meets the HRBP where they are at the right time, depending on their proficiency, where their skills actually are and what the need is at the moment. So let's take a deep dive. I've recorded a video. I hate hearing my voice, so I may shut my ears while y'all listen to this.
Let's learn a little bit more about HR Pro Agent. So HR Pro Agent is our digital assistant in Microsoft 365 Copilot, and it's designed to streamline organization development work and help HR professionals make strategic decisions faster. It basically helps save time spent searching for resources, providing OD best practices, and supporting change management. It's still in the works, it's still being fine-tuned, but today what it can do is navigate OD processes, field guides, and toolkits, offer recommendations grounded in OD best practices, as well as save time by consolidating resources in one place. As you can see, there's multiple prompts people can leverage, from change design and orchestration, leadership team performance. But let's take a look at our own scenario. Let's focus on org design, given that's been the focus of this presentation. So I have a client who wants to redesign their sales organization that's comprised of multiple customers and products. What are some organization structures I should consider, and what are the costs and benefits? So it takes a little bit of time because it's thinking, it's perusing the content on the back end, deciding what is the optimal response. So as you can see, it has provided multiple organization structure possibilities for a sales team. So it has the type of structure, the key characteristics, the costs and benefits, spanning multiple different possibilities. And it offers some additional considerations that you can leverage, like spans and layers, centralization versus decentralization. So let's go ahead and look at another question. So now that I have a sense of what structure we can leverage, what are some example design criteria we could use? Send. And as this is working, what you might have noticed in the previous prompt is that it actually links to the relevant information. So it links to the content that it's pulling from. So if you have further questions, want a little bit more detail, you can just deep dive into those elements in PowerPoints, etc. So here are some example design criteria for redesigning a sales organization: facilitating faster reaction to market changes, increasing manager accountability, moving decision-making closer to the customer. So it offers a slew of design criteria that we can start with to optimize our time and our leaders' time. And then again, it offers some additional considerations. And as you can see, it's linking to multiple resources as well. So let's ask one more question, because we've been primarily focused on content. So let's say that now that we have a sense of the design criteria, we have this understanding of what structures could be leveraged and why, we would like to conduct a design session with the leadership team. So let's ask it, what is an example agenda that we could use? And as this is pulling up, what I'll say, the feedback we've received from HRBPs is, wow, I wish I had had this earlier in my career. This really expedites, pulling of resources and key information at the right time, which, in the past was cumbersome. They had to look through playbooks or lots of different content. So as you can see, it provides a starting point agenda that you can leverage with the times, the potential content like org design, skill, systems thinking, micro design, rewards, and people. So again, great functionality. It's enabling HRBPs and other HR professionals to pull the right information at the right time. Thank you.
You click once. Yeah, right? Don't we wish? Don't we wish we all had this when we were starting out in our careers? Even so now, I'm always like going into my Dropbox and I'm like, I know I did something similar, maybe a year and a half ago. I said, just let me recreate it. Really exciting and amazing that, Microsoft sharing this work with everybody. I think that is such a beautiful thing, sort of an open source attitude toward the OG work that they're doing, and as Eva said, sharing these templates with everyone. So two big thoughts to end here, and then we'll have time for some questions. Systems over heroics. We're asking people to do a lot of work today, and it's scary, and they're overwhelmed, and every company is talking about cutting, to force this augmentation and automation and changing the work. And so this grassroots energy is important, but large-scale transformation needs integrative design, and that is our work. Clear roles for teams, governance process, metrics, moving in sync. And, I've been thinking a lot about the field of org design and where it's going, and I really believe our fields are more important than ever. Impactful, ethical AI adoption sits at the intersection of architecting and activating healthy, productive organizations. And I really think this is what we do is uniquely human work that will only become more important. Just a month ago, I was working with an executive team doing a design workshop over 2 days. And of course, the topic was AI and how it's changing work, and it was all part of it. But one of the executives at one point turned around and said, isn't it funny we're talking about this, and yet we're sitting for 2 days in a room with flip charts, and we're having the most impactful conversations we've had in 2 years. We're aligning, we're setting priorities, we're coming together. AI can't help us with that, right? That won't change. That's the magic that I think we all do. Good, so we have some time for some questions. I know we have a break at 10 where we're happy to stay for another 10 minutes after, and we'll make sure that we end. So yeah, let's get some thoughts, some questions in the back, red shirt. Yeah, wait, let's just bring you a mic. Here. And thank you again. Also to all the folks, I think we have 70 people online who are listening, and I don't know if we can get questions from them in the chat.
Hi, my name is Prachi. Thank you, first of all, Amy and Eva. It's a great consolidation of so many things that one has to pull off to, make something like this. So my experience comes from working for one of the greatest retail and mobility clients in India for agile transformation. And I've touched upon these aspects, but the consolidation, the emphasis, and the strategy is something I found, driving the decision-making as well. I have a couple of questions. One of them is, you showed the maturity model. I was wondering, what is the grain of that model? Is it a team, a product, or a function? That's the first question. Let's just take one. Sure. We'll get some other questions. Sure.
So it's actually at the organization level. So it's looking at all the system enablers from strategy to management processes to work processes to that org health piece. Obviously, there are team components with the like cross-functional collaborative teams, but it's at the systems level. So basically, any organization that has a P&L or has like significant authority over their strategy would work. It doesn't have to be as big as a 20,000 person organization. Hopefully that answered your question.
Good morning, enjoyed your presentation. As I was watching the simulation, I was thinking about how are you weaving in information on the people? In other words, the core traits, the basic nature of the people, their competencies, all of those kinds of things in terms of here's a methodology, but how are we bringing in who are the real people engaged and involved?
Yeah, that's a great question. So we actually have very strong guidelines to not pull in people-related information into our AI technology. And so sometimes even if we ask a question that might veer in that direction, Copilot will just shut down. An HR Pro agent is built on top of Copilot. So unfortunately, we can't like add in any, people-specific information at the moment. Did that answer your question?
Yeah, maybe.
Oh, yes.
Yeah, because these are tools that are general, like OD and org design tools. So I think that would be a next step of like as you're doing a diagnostic or you're working with a particular group, there are other tools that assess team performance and all of those. I think that would be a next level of saying, okay, now we know something, we've done our diagnostic of this team, then what would be the right methodology, right? I think next step. Yeah.
Yeah, so Omar reminded me, we have a slew of agents, as I mentioned. We have a Know Your Team agent where we can actually pull information about a specific business group, unit, etc. Everything from headcount to spans and layers information, etc. And we're shifting in that direction we're gonna have like an employee listening agent. So basically like your engagement survey. So things are popping up all over the place to pull in that information. And the goal is to actually integrate across these agents so that you have like the information about the team and then the HR Pro agent can add recommendations based on the business. Thank you, great question.
I have a question from our virtual attendees. Joe is curious to hear about motivators and how you supported Microsoft employees through this change. What were the challenges and how did you keep them motivated through this?
Yeah, that's a great question. It's still something we're working on because as y'all know, there's a lot of fear with AI. People are scared of losing their jobs. So the goal is to really incentivize them to figure out where they can automate. So the goal is to incentivize them, but also upskill them in a way to where they can take on more strategic work. So part of it is just recognizing that this is a challenge. Like things are gonna be shifting. There are some roles or parts of roles that may not exist anymore. And this opens the door for new possibilities, for the focus on more meaningful strategic work. So a huge piece is actually upskilling, right? Some of the key skills that will be required as AI automates, like creative thinking, problem solving, etc. So again, great question. It's still a work in progress because as we know, change is hard and it takes people a while. And because there's a lot of uncertainty, people are scared, but we're trying to tackle it by incentivizing them, upskilling them, and helping them recognize that this is an actual opportunity.
So I represent an engineering organization, and as a part of the org design, agile org design, we've reduced the number of layers to 5, and we've moved, from a pyramid to a tower model, which means, you have more people at the base. Mm-hmm. My question to you is, and the struggle for us is, at the top levels, how do we define? Right now, we are using revenue ranges and span of control. So what methodology of gap assessment would you really do? Because, when you're going to look at that kind of a tower model, it's going to become leaner and leaner. So what methodology have you used for gap assessment out there?
I'd like to hear from Amy. One thing I will mention is I'm not a big fan of spans and layers. I feel like it's a completely blunt instrument and people start striving for numbers without really understanding what the roles are, what are the strategic capabilities that they need, org capabilities to get there. So I think it actually does a disservice and ends up designing in a way, like when I worked at Bain, we had worked with a large product retailer, and I wasn't there yet, but they had done a spans and layers exercise 5 years before. When I came back in, it was completely reversed. It was back to where it had started because they hadn't assessed root causes and they hadn't really thought through the strategic components. But I'd love to hear Amy's thought.
Yeah, I think this is one of the trends that is happening in business that I found really interesting and new. When people say, well, what's new? Is we are seeing big organizations. Amazon has been very upfront about this, but others are doing the same, of reducing workforce, cutting management, reducing layers, widening spans, even as they're growing, right? So traditionally, the big consulting firms would be brought in, we need to turn around, it's like your garage, I always say, you clean it out, it's all neat, and then all of a sudden everything fills up and it's messy again. And that happens in organizations. We add roles, there are projects, things get messy, it needs to be cleaned out every once in a while. Or we need a turnaround, we need to save money, let's get rid of some middle managers. This is not that. This is, we're a healthy organization, and I really do believe it's almost a forcing mechanism to say, at Amazon, they're talking about a minimum of 8 employees to every manager. In the tech organizations, it's 10, 12, and then some of the creatives, it's a little bit less. But that pressure and that push is saying, how do you change the work? And we'll see, because absolutely, being in this game for so long, that those spans and layers things, if you don't change the work and you just take out jobs, they just creep back in. The work has to get done. What's interesting now is I do see in some places a little more sophisticated of saying, we're going to put that pressure on. I can't possibly manage 6 or 8 people in the way I did before. So how do I use these tools to change my work as a manager and to change their work as supervisors or individual contributors? So something's happening. I think we're in the midst of it. I don't think we'll know whether it works, or 5 years from now, we're all just going to look and say, well, that was yet another, failed experiment. But it's interesting, and it's real, it's happening, and it is affecting jobs. And I think it's good to be positive, and I'm glad Microsoft is reskilling and incentivizing people, but I think there's also just a reality that jobs are changing, some jobs are going away, and this is yet another shift. That's in the short term, may make us more productive. In the short term, people are going to lose jobs.
I have one last question over here.
Hi, I know Microsoft at the global level has responsible AI policies. I'm curious, in your format and approach, how you built in ethical and responsible AI use and reminders, and was it a design constraint? How did you build that into your program?
Yeah, that's a phenomenal question. So it was built in, so the process I had highlighted, there was a checkpoint for RAI, responsible AI, at every step of the way. So basically, you have to submit what you're proposing. They help you evaluate. They're evaluating, is it leveraging confidential information? If so, how are you safeguarding the confidential information? So it was literally a checkpoint at every step of the way. It's the RAI organization. So it's a centralized organization. Yeah. Yeah, of course. All right, so I think that's time. Thank y'all so much. What I forgot to say is 12 years ago, I presented here as a PhD student, and I just never envisioned actually doing a keynote. So I'm truly honored to be here and to be in this position. I really never thought it would happen. And y'all have been an amazing audience, and Amy is truly amazing, shifted from mentor to friend. So I'm really grateful that we were able to partner on this exciting initiative.
Thank you. Thank you.